75th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And again, those of you watching on video, because we have a podcast, we turn this into a podcast, but those of you watching on video will notice that we have a guest at the bottom of the screen, somebody I've known for since back in 2013, I think we first met. So it's Owen Sedgwick-Jell. I've just been told that I've been spelling Owen's surname wrongly for years. So it apparently has a J and not a G. Is that correct?
That's spot on.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us, Owen. So, who is Owen Sedgwick-Jell and how have you got such a fantastic surname? What's the story behind that?
All right, well, we'll start with the name. There's a very short line of Sedgwick-Jells because Sedgwick's quite a common surname, but Jell was a name that was virtually, only found in the bottom corner of Kent, around Dover,
Oh,
Deal, and
right.
Lydd. Um, Around the turn of the century, my great grandmother was marrying um, into a family, and she thought all the Jells were riffraff apart from the one that she was marrying, and so she was damned if she was going to take that name. So she kept her own name, which 1900s was a pretty
Pretty
radical
bold.
thing to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when they had my grandfather, he became the first Sedgwick-Jell with a hyphen. It was, at the time that was something that you'd find, it was a very aristocratic thing to do, to be doing that sort of thing. And I think people thought she was a bit above herself, being a working class girl from the bottom right hand corner of Kent. But she did,
Yeah.
and so there's been four generations of us now,
Right.
and
Well,
that's it.
we met, didn't we, Owen, when I joined the co-op, and you were an integral part of the Academies program. A sort of very new Academies program, and you and Mags Bradbury were working it out how it was all going to fit together. But then you went on to something else. So do you want to just explain what that was and your journey from there to where you are now, and just explain, what you're doing?
Fine. So my role now is head of membership and programs at Woodcraft Folk. Woodcraft Folk is a cooperative, inclusive youth charity that's been going for 100 years next year. So we were founded in 1925. I joined after leaving the co-op. I joined at the beginning of 2015 to deliver a very short, like 18-month growth program, which was funded from the uh, Uniformed Youth Growth Fund, which was being funded from, do you remember the LIBOR fines
Oh
that were
yeah, yeah.
levied on banks for fiddling the interbank lending rate? Um, the Cabinet Office dumped all of that fine income into a fund to grow new opportunities for youth work, for opportunities for youth work charities. So us and the Scouts and the Guides and the Boys Brigade and the Jewish Lads and various others, to grow new provision to get waiting lists down and things. So I was brought in to lead that project across 4 or 5 locations in the north of the UK. Um, that led to some further funding from different streams to grow groups in different parts of the country. And then sort of post COVID, we had a restructure of the organisation and created a new kind of senior leadership team. And I was lucky enough to be given the role of head of membership and programs. Um, it's an organisation that I grew up attending their groups as a child. My parents were involved as volunteers, and I kind of owe a lot of the early part of my life, lots of formative experiences to my experience in it. I don't think I would have ended up working in the co-op movement and at the heart of the co-op movement for 11 years without having had a grounding in cooperative values from my own participation in the Woodcraft Folk. So it's directly responsible for us meeting up, Frank.
Yeah. Well, how big
So,
is it now?
Owen, I was just saying, I'm wrongly perhaps. I've never been aware of the woodcraft folk. Just what is it? What do they do? Who do they
What is it?
appeal
What does it
to?
do? Well, I think you're not unusual in not having come across us, because I think we're a voluntary led charity, and therefore we're very strong in some parts of the country and virtually unknown in others, because it's um, we depend upon volunteers to run groups, and they don't come out everywhere. we were founded in 1925, effectively as a breakaway from the scouting movement. I mean, the genesis is a little bit more complicated, and that's probably a whole nother podcast.
Well,
But
sounds like a story there, Stan, doesn't it? We need
Yeah.
to get back.
absolutely,
We need to
but
come back and unravel that story.
I mean, the short version is that a bunch of idealistic young people, basically kind of utopian socialists, were involved in the scouting movement because it was an opportunity to get out and see the great outdoors and do all of those things. But you know, in the interwar period, were very conscious that the scouting movement at the time had these militaristic and imperialistic overtones, and felt that they were basically preparing the children of the working class for the next imperial war, when actually we should be thinking about building a more peaceful future and thinking internationally and so on. So they broke away and they formed this utopian egalitarian alternative youth organisation in Catford in South London, that very quickly grew across South London and was recognised immediately by the Woolwich Arsenal Co-op Society, as people who were promulgating the values that the co-op was trying to espouse. And so they attracted early funding from the co-op, £5 to go and spend at the co-op Emporium in Woolwich to buy camping equipment. We've got the letter in our archive at LSE. It's at Institute of Education. So you'll be seeing a lot from us about our heritage in our 100th year. We've got a new grant fund from Heritage Lottery, which is helping us to use the archive that is sitting in the Institute of Education in their special collections to tell our story, and also to kind of talk about the organisation we are today. Currently, we've got around 200 groups up and down the country, most of them, sort of serving between 10 and 20 young people, led by groups of between 2 and 10 adult volunteers. So we're, working in lots of geographic areas, from inner city areas. We've always been very strong in London, but we've also got groups springing up in rural areas, in kind of market towns, and so on. The values and ethos, right from the get-go, was about embedding that cooperative and egalitarian ethos, but also about talking about getting young people out of the cities and into the country. And the woodcraft in the name is about the idea of living at one with nature and treading lightly on the earth, effectively. It kind of has its origins in some what would now be fairly dubious kind of cultural appropriation of Native American kind of law and ideals. So all that Ernest Thompson Seton stuff, which I think was done with the right intentions by some working class young adults from South London, but viewed through today's lens, some of the stuff that they were doing, some of the dressing up and things, are incredibly uncomfortable. But the idea of looking and going, well, here is a culture that we admire because of the following reasons, is still a noble intention. What that now looks like is lots of environmental education, lots of talking about how to reduce our own impact on the planet and on the climate, but also, because of that very strong internationalist idea that I mentioned earlier, also thinking more holistically about environmental justice, environmental racism, and actually problematizing some of the perhaps more mainstream narratives about, well, we'll all be all right if we just turn our thermostat down and drive less, and actually go, well, no, what do we really need to change in terms of the global system in order to bring the climate under control?
So how often do they meet then, these groups?
So the majority of our groups meet basically weekly in term time.
Right.
Mostly about an hour and a half, and then we will also do residential youth work's always been a big backbone of what we do. So in summer holidays and odd weekends throughout the year, we'll be doing camps, we'll be doing residential trips, and so on.
Right. So
And
there's a website for this, isn't there? So if people are interested in this, they just need
yeah,
to.
there is. So woodcraft.org.uk is our main website, and you can find bits about the history, bits about what we do now, bits about our current projects and programs, but also crucially find your local group. And if there isn't one near you, then you can inquire, and you can tell us that you'd be interested in finding a group near you.
Or setting one up.
Or setting one up,
Yeah,
absolutely. We're also, I mean, we're looking to, like all charities, we're always on the lookout for funds, and we are always keen to have regular donations from people who support our work but don't want to do so by actually, coming out
Yeah.
and leading groups of young people. So we've a volunteer supporter scheme called Friends of the Folk, which we're hoping to get, 1,000 new Friends of the Folk in our centenary year. You
right.
can find information about.
Well, I'm happy to get that down to 999. So, but if you want the link, I'll put it at the end of this video. And if you're watching on the podcast, I'll put it in the little summary text that goes with the podcast as well, so you can pick that up. Stan, you going to say?
I was just going to ask if there was a knock-on from Forest Schools. Is there any kind of symbiosis there as Forest Schools becomes quite popular, or maybe it's becoming less popular now? I don't know.
Yeah, there is a lot of overlap, I think. So, I mean, it's also important to think about. I mean, Forest School and Forest School Camps is the other organisation. So we've perhaps got more in common with Forest School Camps, which is an organisation that's been going not quite as long as us, but has a lot of similarities with us in the way that they do their camps and residentials. And I know several of our volunteers grew up in Forest School camps and found us. The crucial difference with them is that they don't have weekly group work; they just do these kind of holidays away.
Yeah.
But the Forest School, as in the kind of educational pedagogy, I think we've got lots of people who are volunteers with us or staff with us in some cases who are also Forest School practitioners. There's a crucial, like, our young people hugely enjoy doing that kind of bushcraft activity, as we call it. There's a firelighting and whittling and all of those things, which are fundamental to some of the methodology of Forest School. I think there's a lot to admire in that pedagogy about the way that the ideas that underpin what you're doing in Forest Schools is this stuff around teaching young people to explore the boundaries and manage risk for themselves and stuff is a lot of the stuff that we want to do within our own groups. I think the difference is that, I mean, people sometimes think, oh, well, you're just like Forest School. Well, we do some of that stuff, but we also do lots more kind of discussion and debate and drama and geopolitics and simulation and all of those sorts of things, which are not part of the Forest School pedagogy. It feels like there's a lot of similarity in terms of the outcomes they want to achieve for young people. There's a broader set of kind of methodologies that we use to achieve those outcomes. Despite the name, we're not always outdoors. The majority of our provision for young people happens in schools and drafty church halls and so on up in the country.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. And as I'll put the link at the end of the video. Bear in mind, we generally last about 30 minutes on these chats, and we've probably done about 15 minutes there. So let's crack on with. Well, I haven't said, how are you this week, Stan? Are you right?
Yeah, cold. There's
snow outside.
The road outside is actually deadly. I think it must have rained and then frozen last night, so it is like an ice rink outside.
Yeah. Well, we're all Greater Manchester based, so I've got to be careful when you talk about Manchester to people that live in Salford. But anyway, sorry, Stan. Yeah, I know there are two cities in Manchester. Anyway,
City.
The first city, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Manchester was part of the Salford 100.
Do you
That's
see
just
the sensitivity here, Owen?
I do.
You know, just you think you're making a nice statement, then suddenly it comes back to haunt you. Anyway,
no, it's a family thing because my dad still lives in Lancashire, 200 yards up there, or did. He's passed away now. But his argument was always I was born and lived in Lancashire and I've never moved.
right, what's caught your eye this week, Stan?
Well, there were a few things that were happening this week that caught my eye. One was the development, if it is a development, of the rise, the teams that are going to provide school improvement. There's a lot that I'm not clear about whether that's because it does talk about a universal offer, but is that universal to schools that have just been inspected, or is it all schools that can suddenly be? Anyway, I was looking at that and looking particularly at the recruitment of the area leaders, which I found
Stan, has
fascinating.
anyone approached you for it, Stan?
No, 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 no,
No,
no.
I don't think
But
they've well, I don't think I know they haven't approached me, Stan. I think we're too out there now. Yeah.
well, I saw the appointment process, which involves a test on your judgment, which I thought was fabulous. They're going to test your judgment and they're going to test your ability with a psychometric test
All right.
and a numeracy and literacy test.
Well, that knocks us all out there then, Stan.
Yeah, just
Forget the call.
anyway, in reading that, there was a piece that somebody had written that put at the end saying, I don't know how this fits into the Labour's vision for education. And it struck me, I'm not sure there is one. And yet, we talk about leadership a lot. In virtually in the same sentence that you talk about leadership, you talk about vision. Good leaders have a vision. They're able to share this vision with the people who follow them, blah, blah, blah. And it just struck me that I've never tried to seek out what is the vision for education for this new government. And I honestly don't think there is one. I think they're too tied up with trying to fix things that were damaged in the past, that they haven't got an overall strategy. And it reminds me so much of schools that get a bit of money, need to expand, so they build a little classroom on there because that's how much money they've got. And then a bit later, they get a bit more money and they build something that is incongruent with the first one, but and end up then spending more money trying to convert the two into. And it's just that fix it, solve it, focus on these areas without an overall strategy for where we're going. How do we see education in 5 and 10 years' time? And it terrifies me to think, one, I've not noticed that there's no vision, and I'm, really keen on leadership.
Yeah. Well, I can bring Owen in here by saying that actually I think there is no industrial strategy either, and actually at the moment there are attempts to create that industrial strategy. So I don't want to discredit the government for that, but actually education, people going through education will generally lead to work, and unless there's a sort of vision for where the country's going industrially or economically in terms of its regeneration, you need to sort of, I don't know, move the tiller or whatever in a certain direction in order to meet that. And clearly, youth service, in the work of youth work, that also feeds into, particularly for some of, for the element that where youth work is at its most effective is where it's actually, I think, engaging with some who have found education a little bit tricky, for whatever reason. And actually, how, unless there is some direction as to where the country is heading and how youth work fits into that education strategy, I feel as though it's the same sort of issue, isn't it? You're just sort of stepping forward, not quite sure whether it's the right direction, whether you're going to end up having to come back on yourself because actually you thought it was over here, but it's over here. Is that how you feel, Owen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the decline of youth services um, within education. I started my career. The first job I had after school, um, I was working as a school-based youth worker, um, and I was one of a team of school-based youth workers reporting to a youth work manager who was based in a relatively small working class comprehensive school in the north of the city. I ran breakfast clubs, and then I ran an after school provision, and did lunchtime
Oh,
drop-ins.
hang on, Owen. You mean we're revisiting stuff that has already been tried and tested?
There was all that infrastructure, and some of it hasn't gone away. I mean, we at Woodcroft we also run some campsites and outdoor centres, and some of the clients that we get in from outside the Woodcroft folk, they're basically small independent youth work charities that are the rump of what used to be a county or a borough youth service. There's an excellent organisation called Madlow in Oldham. It's Oldham spelt backwards. And it's basically the woman who used to be the youth work manager, just started it as a labour of love and has kept it going
Wow.
on, a few small grants and string and gaffer tape, and
I
is still bringing huge numbers of young people down to the Wye Valley to go canoeing every summer.
This is up your streets then, isn't
And
it?
having a whale of a
Yeah,
time.
well, I can remember almost to the day the death of the youth service in Lancashire, because it was a thriving youth service, and up until that point, they were building new youth clubs and acquiring old buildings and turning them into youth clubs, spending millions, and then suddenly the guy who was a very enthusiastic leader, senior manager in the local authority, was just gone.
When was this, Stan? Just give us some idea of the
It'll
time.
be round about 2010, maybe
Right.
maybe slightly before that. But it was just gone, and there was nothing.
Mm.
Yeah, it was something happened in 2010. I can't remember.
Or politically, what was it?
Struggling to remember what was
Oh, I'm
going on.
sure.
But
I was guessing at the day. I wasn't.
No, it's convenient, Stan. It adds to the narrative. As,
Well,
as a colleague
it
said
was.
to us this week, why let the truth get in the way of a good story?
Yeah,
absolutely. But it's
Um,
interesting you talk about, the buildings, Stan.
yeah,
And we were experiencing under the last government, they were like, oh, we need to do something about youth. And there was a capital investment program. Well, do you know what? We can do youth work
yeah,
in a church hall.
yeah.
We
yeah.
can do youth work. We can do youth work in the bloody park. We don't need a building to do it in. What we need is people. And you could only get revenue funding to actually fund youth workers under that scheme, as a small part of the bolt-on costs
Yeah.
to renovating existing spaces. And it's like, well, if you'd have listened to what the sector needed, we would have said, no, core revenue funding to employ professional youth workers.
Mm.
Mm.
It is something, I think. If you were madly rich, you look round where you live and you think, do you know what, a youth centre would be really good to place here, let's say, a couple of places near where I live, and think, how good would that be for just stopping the issue we've got with antisocial behaviour around 13, 14, 15-year-olds? How good would it be if you could give them something that would take their interest and take their enthusiasm?
And it used to be that if you were building an estate of houses, that would have been baked into the
Yeah,
plans.
yeah.
But now that local authorities are commissioning rather than delivering,
Mm.
it happens much less.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Owen, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I was struck by this, the press release from the DfE about the rise in school exclusions, talking about suspensions within school nearly doubling compared to pre-pandemic, and also talking about permanent exclusions going up by a third, but also talking about those temporary exclusions being the same pupils being excluded more times for longer, and coupled with stuff around persistent absence as well. And both the DfE and the teaching unions talking about the impact since COVID. And I think one of the really telling things is that the peak. I don't know. You'll be able to tell me whether it's relevant or not. The peak for exclusions at the moment is in year 9, which is the group of young people who had their transition from primary to secondary disrupted by COVID. Now, I don't know whether year 9 was, it feels plausible that year 9 might always have been a peak for exclusions, frankly, but you'll be able to tell better than me whether that's a relevant statistic or not.
Yeah,
I think one of the things I worry about the comparison with long past is there was a lot of grey exclusions in the past where children were excluded with parental agreement and nothing was recorded.
yeah,
Flexi schooling and the like.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the figures would compare accurately with the number, but I agree with you that it is definitely on the rise, and I think well, my personal view is it's about an intolerance of children being different, and not fitting into something that we are creating a set of boxes and a set of hurdles that you have to go through, and if you don't fit into the box or if you can't manage the hurdle, you're out on your own. That's the way I see it at the moment.
interesting.
And
On the Fisher Family Trust latest dashboard, it's not for all schools, but it is a lot of schools provide the data to Fisher Family Trust. Primary attendance is at 90 nationally, is at 95.5, and secondary is at 92.5. And I have to say, when I was a head teacher many, many years ago, when I first started, I would have given my right arm to have figures like that, you know? So picking up on that point, I mean, there's been this surge, there's been a persistent or an increase over time of attendance, and attendance been getting gradually better. But something has happened, because to have that high level of national average, that hides on masks, schools that have got very low, or what we would deem to be very, very worrying levels of attendance, particularly in secondary schools. So, in a way, it is important, isn't it, to get the nuance of this, that, as you say, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps, to me, it's always around, I hate to say it because I always get shot down saying it, but it's a bit like, some schools are offering a product which actually some of their customers are not that interested in. You can either
But I
say,
think it sort of links, Frank, to what you were saying about the industrial strategy as well. Because I mean, my kid goes to a very good school with lots of really interesting teaching and so on, lots of very fired up subject experts and so on. But even then, when I compare to the teaching that I had, the expectations on them to behave in a very adult manner and be very on task and very focused for much of their working day are much greater than they were on me at school. And I sort of it sort of circles around to your point about industrial strategy, because I look at how the world of work has changed. We're working from home, we're working much more flexibly, we're being encouraged to, take breaks for our self-care and step away from our screens and do all of this. I can't remember the last time I put a tie on. And I used to, when I worked with you, Frank, I used to put on a jacket and tie every day.
one of the great things of leaving the co-op was not having to wear that tie.
But you look at workplaces today and they're becoming much more casual. You look at, and my kid still goes off to school dressed like a 19th century bank clerk. Um,
Yeah.
I wonder whether the world of work that we are seeking to equip our young people for is the world of work that our education practice is geared towards. And I think the point Stan made about kids not fitting in the boxes and schools not having, part of me says they don't know what to do with them and that might lead to exclusion. But I think also they just haven't got the flexibility, they haven't got the funding, they haven't got the slack in their timetables and
No,
their staffing structures to be able to have that person-centered approach.
I was looking at some. It was a form somebody'd done for classroom observation. I didn't think many schools still did that, but and one of the questions it asks is: are the children thinking hard enough And is the teacher encouraging them to think harder? And I thought, what are we doing? With you, Frank, I think schools, in some schools, are not offering something that's attractive to children. And I know there'll be people say, well, it doesn't have to be attractive to children. They've got to go there and they're going to learn like I did. But actually, people learn best when they are comfortable in where they are. And I know there's some theories that say you learn better if you're uncomfortable. But my experience is that children who are happy coming to school and enjoy coming to school learn better, do better, and have much better outcomes.
Mm.
And to
So,
link to the point Frank was making, are more likely to turn up,
yeah,
presumably.
It
yeah,
is. It's, you know, I think because this all links to my point, what's caught my eye this week, which is around there's been an independent review of behaviour hubs. Now, behaviour hubs are a program that was devised by the previous government, located involving about 650 schools nationwide, predominantly serving some of the most challenging areas. And they found that the teachers thought behaviour was improving, but the children didn't. So, and actually the figures the report, I've got to be fair, was saying it's a relatively small sample. You can't generalize from this, but actually it was something like the children felt that behaviour got worse when the behaviour hub approach was adopted, and actually staff marginally felt it got better. And actually, I saw something in a primary school a couple of weeks ago where children in reception were being asked to walk from reception into the hall, walking with their hands behind their back. And in a way, every child conformed to it. Don't get me wrong. And you might say, well, there's no harm in that. But these were 4-year-olds, but all being expected to walk with their hands behind their back. And the issue for me is around just it felt rather adult like. It felt as if it didn't have a place in that setting,
Who's it for is the
Yeah,
question I'd always ask.
yeah.
yeah.
And I think it was interesting that, some of the schools that they tried to do the behaviour hub with, rejected it on the basis that actually the reason we're doing we're overwhelmed by initiatives. This is just another one. We'd love to do it, but I've got so many other things going on. The other issues were senior leaders absent, so people that were meant to be leading it suddenly were off or got a job elsewhere. So and the program itself was quite heavily admin heavy, because obviously the hub investing that money wanted to have evidence to say that things were getting better, and the only way that they could get that primarily was by doing more data collection, more surveys, that side of it. So you can see the difficulties. But the broader issue is that there are currently £700 million has been spent on school-led initiatives by the previous government across 13 different initiatives, of which only 4 have been reviewed as to whether or not they're effective. So this, in effect, is quite good that there is another independent survey of this. But actually, that £700 million for me, we're going to have a serious look at how that money's being spent. Because some of these projects are actually from a previous government where there have been ministers who have been very keen to have particular things happen, and they've obviously funded those initiatives. So I'm not suggesting that we pull them all, but actually I would have thought a priority is let's get out there, let's review all of them. If some of them are not working, let's cut the funding, let's stop interfering with schools, let them give the money to the schools at the end of the day to get on with it.
I'm just thinking, Frank, a boss of mine, colleague as well, but a boss for a time, used to have a phrase when people talked about reception children in early years, like that walking, she used to say to them, they are not adults with little legs.
I think that's
So
quote of the
true.
day, that's Stan. Yeah. I was going to mention one more, but I've decided not to because the talk's gone on a little bit too long. But it was really around how young people who are musicians can be exploited by major record labels and what have you. But perhaps I'll put a little bit of that in the text at the bottom of the video. Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed. That's another week gone by. Goes really quickly, doesn't it, Owen?
It does.
You
Thank
know,
you. It's been a pleasure.
yeah, and actually, I think we get so much out of it. The fun for Stan and I is meeting guests, not just because you're here, Owen, but it is. You know, when Stan and I do these little chats, just Frank and Stan, the viewing figures start to plummet. You know, so we know that guests bring so much vitality and viewers to our chat. So thank you very much for that. And
Thanks, Owen.
You're very
all
welcome.
being well, we'll see you all next week, next Friday, with another Frankenstein chat. So cheerio from us. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hello, everybody. Just a little addition to what we normally do on the Frankenstein chat. I've been contacted by Russell Harvey. Russell has been a guest on the Frankenstein chat a number of times. He's known as the resilience coach, and he offers a sort of range of services around well-being and other aspects around sustaining, you know, energy and drive and whatever, and focus on some of the important issues that you as school leaders are involved in. And he is available for work, and I just thought I'd sort of give him a little plug. So there is a link to his website after this little clip, and I hope if you're interested, you'll give him a call or make contact with him, or at least have a look at his website. Okay, so that's all from me, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye bye.